welcome to yet another York Festival of Ideas event. It's a real pleasure to welcome all of you here to listen to the inspirational Professor Claudia Goldin from Harvard University, talking about her really fascinating work, mapping the history of professional women's career paths, and really what the challenges and barriers still remaining in a whole range of dimensions, not least of which is gender inequality in relation to career paths and progression and pay. Before I start, let me just go through a couple of technical issues. The first of which is, if you require a subscription service, if you press on CC at the bottom of the closed captioning, you can either turn it off or on, dependent on your requirements. The Q&A function is live throughout the event, so please do post your questions all along. Claudia will give a presentation and then we'll have a little chat and then we'll open it to the floor. We are recording this event, as you will see, and so please do also, you will be sent the link to the recording after this event. Please do share that widely. This is a very important topic and we want to involve as many people as possible, and it will be available on our YouTube Watch Again platform, which is very popular. So let me introduce our distinguished speaker. Claudia Goldin is the Henry Lee Professor of Economics at Harvard University, and it's a great pleasure to welcome you, Claudia. Claudia's books include The Race Between Education and Technology and Understanding the Gender Gap and Women Working Longer, something I think many of us can recognize. I thought in framing the book, rather than try to interpret this myself, there were two short snippets of reviews that I really thought were incredibly interesting in introducing tonight. The first of which was the following couple of sentences. Girls do better than boys in high school, and women are more likely than men to graduate from college. And yet men will earn more than women. How come? Claudia Goldin is the expert on this question. And then a further review, Career and Family provide real answers to a century's worth of questions about the drivers of gender inequality. With the rigor of an economist, and this is the bit I love, and the deft touch of a humanist, Goldin combines data with individual life stories, leaving no doubt that the problem lies in the nature of work rather than the nature of women. I think those two reviews get us off to a really fantastic start. So I'm going to hand over to Claudia to listen to her present her fantastic book, which I have here right beside me, Career and Family, Women's Century-Long Journey Towards Equity.
I am delighted to be with you and delighted that you can see my slides, and I have no idea what happened. So my talk is going to traverse 120 years from when college graduate women were able to have either a family or a career to now, when many anticipate having both a family and a career. And as we have moved into what we are dealing with today, which is a hybrid era that I am going to call ACDC, meaning it's after COVID, but unfortunately still during COVID. We may, you will see towards the end of my little talk here, we may be on the cusp of real change in the workplace, and I hope in caregiving, at least in my country, which has lagged many of the others. And I'm going to take you on this journey of discovery from then until now. And the journey is going to wind up today when more women than men are graduating college in the US, in Britain, in many different countries, when about the same fractions in the US are achieving advanced and professional degrees, when there's great similarity in ambitions, but there is less in eventual achievements in terms of career. There are other achievements. There are ones that women have that men don't have, ones that men have that women don't have. And the reason for these differences concerns what I have called the concept of greedy work and the relationship between gender inequality and couple inequity, or between couple equity and gender equality. These are two sides of the same issue for different sex couples. Same-sex couples can and often do have couple inequity, but they will not have, of course, gender inequality, and they will not enhance, therefore, gender inequality. When different sex couples give up couple equity, they increase gender inequality. And I am going to explain this. This is an important part of what I am going to talk about today. A few clarifications, just two. My work is going to concern college graduate women because they have had the greatest opportunity to achieve career even when their numbers were low. And the second point is that when I say the word career, I mean something different from a job or from work or from an occupation. A career is achieved over time. It comes from the Latin root to mean to run a race. Think about carriages and chariots. A job is a spot position to earn a living. Aspirations and achievements of college women across the past, let's say 120 years, greatly changed. And the reasons for these changes vary with the period. The labor market across different countries shifted its demands at some point from brawn work, from the work of heavy lifting and mechanical work, muscular work, manual work, to brain work, the stuff that we generally do with our heads, although sometimes with our hands. Technologies changed the home. Think of the big things like electricity and clean water. And in the US, I would say central heating. But much later, greatly improved fertility control enabled women to delay marriage and delay childbearing. But the way that work is done is structured. The persistence of social norms, no matter how much weaker they've become, mean a lower ability for women to attain both career and family. Groups of college graduate women form a succession of generations, each sort of metaphorically passing a baton from one to the next with its warnings and its advice. 5 distinct groups can be discerned in the data, and this is for the US. The first graduated college from around 1900 to 1919. It achieved family or career. We'll see, rarely both. The next had a job and then a family. The third, who are in America the mothers of the baby boom, graduated college from around 1946, the end of World War II, to the mid-1960s. It had a family, then a job. And the fourth, that's my group, was the first to desire a career, then a family. And the fifth, graduating since the 1980s. And although I have an end date here, it really doesn't have an end date. I have an end date only because I'm tracing individuals to when they were in their late 30s and early 40s. The fifth desires a career and a family, and it has succeeded to some degree more than any other. The 120-year transition from career or family to career and family is bookended here with women who served in the US Congress, beginning with Jeannette Rankin, the first woman elected to federal office in the US. She was typical of the career portion of her cohort. She had no children. She never married. She had one absolutely amazing career. At the other extreme is Tammy Duckworth of the state of Illinois, who's now a senator. She was the first senator to have a baby while holding office, and she is the first to have brought a baby into an active session of Congress, although many in America would say that there have always been babies in Congress. She is an extraordinary member of Group 5. And Betty Friedan, the famous author of The Feminine Mystique, looking rather coquettish, is in the middle. I'm going to provide a little bit of more detail on each of these 5 groups. And what I'm going to do is tell you a little bit about the fraction who never married, the fraction who never had children, and the fraction who were employed if they were married when they were young and when they were in their middle age years. College graduate women first attained, as I said, family or career, and few in this first group managed both. As you can see, 50%, in fact, 50% never had a birth, 32% never married by age 50, and just a small fraction, as you can see, were employed if ever married. In Group 2, which is a transition generation, more college women aspired to have careers, but that simply didn't happen for various reasons. Group 3, the mothers of the baby boom, as job opportunities improved and as in America was swept up in early marriages and a baby boom, the likes of which we never saw before and we've never seen since. As that happened, women shifted to planning for family first, but then a job. Just 9% of this group never married, 18% never had a birth. You could see the very large changes that occurred from Group 1 to Group 3. Their employment was low when they were young, but greatly increased to about 73% when the kids and when they were somewhat older. This was truly progressive change since they found a way to have a job and a family, at times, in fact, a career and a family. They trained to be teachers and nurses and social workers and librarians and administrators after the kids were grown. Career and family became the goal for many in Group 4. They delayed marriage and children considerably for a career. They had high work rates when they were young. For Group 4, the pill, the birth control pill, and its dissemination to young single women enabled the delay of marriage and enabled the delay of family as well. And it helped boost their investments in career. But the biological clock ran out on many. And as you saw before, 27% never had children, as this iconic Roy Lichtenstein print reminds us. For Group 5, the goal is career and family, and just 21% didn't have children by their 40s. Marriage and family for Group 5 were still greatly delayed, in fact, even more delayed than for Group 4. But birth rates were actually up, in part due to assisted reproductive technologies. You may be thinking that because of large increases in college graduation over this period, that most of the differences across the groups concern selection, who went to college. The surprising finding is that selection is not very important. The elite changed along with the ordinary individuals, those you might call the hoi polloi. An important accompaniment to the transition across the groups were changes in customs and norms. The General Social Survey, a large data set, has for some time asked respondents the same question. Did they believe that preschool children would likely suffer if their mothers worked? And the answers are graphed here by the respondent's birth year on the horizontal axis. On the vertical axis is the percent agreeing with this question. And as you can see, agreement decreased. Fewer people said yes, they would suffer for both men and women. Without new evidence, even, the responses changed. Fewer agreed with the notion that children would be harmed. The older norm became more expensive to sustain, in part as the earnings of women rose. Even though a succession of women made progress on this journey to career and family, women's careers still often take a back seat to those of their spouses. And even among the latest group, let's call it group 5+, graduating college in the early 2000s, 28% have attained career and family by their late 30s, but about 50% of equivalent men have. And most of that difference is attaining career, not attaining family. The most recent group has expressed frustration and has placed the blame on many different factors, including discrimination in the workplace, managerial bias, pay inequity, sexual harassment. To measure the level of discontent over time, I've used various counts of phrases in various newspapers. Here is the count from the New York Times. There are two waves you can see. The first is in the early 70s in the US, and the second is in more recently in the 2010s. The first one is in part due to the noisy revolution of the mid-60s and early 70s in the US, and that is Betty Friedan in front of the group. And the second one in the 2010s is in part due to the Me Too movement in the US and elsewhere. But as each group progressed and passed, as I said, that metaphorical baton from one to the next, and as actual barriers fell, and as social norms changed, the real underlying problem was revealed. There's no question that there is classic discrimination. There's no question that there are bad actors and biased workers and discriminatory supervisors. But most of the difference in earnings between men and women is due to something else. And the new problem with no name, to paraphrase Betty Friedan, is the notion of greedy work. Working more hours or particular hours leads to greater rewards, even on an hourly basis. And in upper out jobs, such as those where you make partner or those in which you get a first promotion, or in academia where you get tenure, those are upper out jobs. More effort today produces or enhances the ability to have that promotion later. But to have a family takes the time of at least one parent. There is no way to entirely contract that out, and one wouldn't want to do that anyhow. For a couple to share the joys equally is costly. So let me illustrate. And so on the horizontal axis here are hours, on the vertical axis are total earnings. One job here, the red line, is flexible. It has a linear wage with respect to hours. You work 10 hours, you get 10 times more than if someone worked 1 hour. You work 100 hours, you get 100 times more. That's linear with respect to hours. The other is not so flexible. That's the blue line. It has a wage that rises with hours. The more hours you put in, the higher your wage per hour. And it needn't be the number of hours. It could be which hours. Can I call you up at 12 at night? Can I get you on Sunday or Saturday? A couple with children can't both work at the blue dot. If they did, the children would perish. They could both work at the red dot, but if they did that, they would be leaving a lot of money on the table, the difference that I show there. So therefore, they split. One works the flexible, less remunerative red job, and the other works the less flexible, more remunerative blue job. For many highly educated couples with children, she's a professional who is also on call at home, and he's the professional who's also or mainly on call at the office. In consequence, he earns more than she does, and this gives rise to a gender gap in earnings. It also produces couple inequity. If the flexible job could be made more productive, the difference would be less. Here I've made the flexible job more productive. And family equity would be cheaper. You can see that that difference has become less. It was larger, now it's smaller. Family equity would become cheaper, less expensive to purchase it, and couples could purchase it and, in fact, at the same time, reduce the gender gap. Note that even for same-sex couples, there could still be couple inequity, but it wouldn't add to gender inequality. And even if a couple wanted a 50-50 relationship, high earnings for a position with less controllable hours would entice them to specialize. Both would have jobs, demanding jobs, but one would have the less remunerative, flexible position, and the other would have the higher paying, more demanding position. The point is that the gender gap in earnings is a symptom of career blockage. It is not the cause. The cause of career blockage is the high price of couple equity. So you might say, great, but what are the solutions? The first point, and it's really very important, is that getting the correct diagnosis is really the first step to a solution. I see three possible solutions. Two would involve a change in relative prices, and one would try to shift preferences. The first would involve lowering the cost of flexibility, which here is the amenity of work. Another would involve reducing the cost of childcare and elder care, which I haven't mentioned. And the third would try to alter gender norms. Difficult to know exactly how one does that, possibly through some tax incentives. Let's take a deeper look at the first solution. How would one lower the price of flexibility? The simplest way is to create good substitutes between workers. Using information technology could allow information to pass in a better fashion with little loss of fidelity. You could hand off clients with less loss of information. Teams of substitutes could be created as they have been in many fields, high-end fields like pediatrics and anesthesiology and veterinary medicine, personal banking, many tech jobs, primary care doctors. The tale I have told was set in the years that I will call BCE. BCE meaning before the COVID era. What does it tell us about the new era? In March of 2020, we all remember that we descended into a during COVID world. Those who could sheltered in place, they worked from home. Fortunate children had online schooling and at-home help. Parental child care time, for most of the estimates that we have, had just about doubled. In the age that we're in now of AC/DC, schools are open, childcare time is still a bit higher than before. One edge of the silver lining to these very dark times that we have gone through is that in the US, for example, we began, I don't know where it is now, a national dialogue about caregiving. We had this conversation in the US long ago in 1943, when we desperately needed non-working mothers to help out on the home front to win the war. We created subsidized preschools. They were open from early morning to evening, and we also had extended public school hours. We then abandoned these policies because women were not that important in the economy, but they became extremely important. Women are now about half the labor force, somewhat less in terms of number of hours. We learned in the pandemic that the economy runs on women. Another edge of the silver lining is that we've learned to use technology to work from home, as we're doing right now, except I'm in my office. And as long as it doesn't become a female enclave, it will serve to lower the cost of flexibility. And what do I mean by that? Well, we always had flexible jobs, but they were expensive. If one doesn't have to go to Tokyo to do an M&A, parents, especially women, will be able to take these high-end positions. So another part of the solution is to reduce extensive travel, which is what we've been doing, and reduce extensive meetings. Enable work from home, WFH, but don't create a female enclave and don't make it work from hell. Make the amenity less expensive by making flexible work more productive. The story that I have told for the BCE, the before COVID era, is what we need in our AC/DC world. Prior to March of 2020, in a time that I have called BCE, the reasons women were being held back from achieving career and family became clearer, and clouds parted, and they allowed us to see what was blocking the way. And what was blocking the way was greedy work and the relationship between gender equality and couple equity, or between gender inequality and couple inequity, the two sides of the same issue. When couples give up couple equity, they increase gender inequality. And the journey continues. And I thank you, York Festival.
Thank you so much, Claudia, for such a brilliant overview. That was so interesting and really fascinating. The greedy jobs phenomenon, it's such an interesting and very visceral phrase that brings to life, I think, for many people, a working environment that soaks up enormous amounts of time. And in your book, there are really a significant number of references to the idea of time, including one area that you particularly focus in on is the role of the career gap. And I was very struck by your references around MBA female graduates who 10, 15 years on from graduating have a significant gender pay gap, something like 73 cents in the dollar. What do we need to do to think about parity around career gaps and how women can do that flexibility thing that you talked about so that there is less of a slowdown in their career? Is there anything that we can do from a policy perspective or more in a working environment that enables women to be able to continue their career at a reasonable level of pace?
So, as I said, there are three levers. There are two relative prices and there's norms. So clearly, if men and women did the same things, shared, and it was just a flip of a coin who did what, then you would still have couple inequity, but you wouldn't have gender inequality. Okay.
Mm.
So in some sense, gender norms don't get us exactly where we would. Changing gender norms would be nice, but it may not get us where we want to go. Then we have relative prices. So if much of the problem has to do with care, both elder care and the
Mm.
care of children, then lowering the price of that would mean that more people could afford it, and sharing wouldn't be as onerous. So that's one possibility. And certainly we can point to a few countries where that has taken hold. And we can point to the fact that those countries do have not zero, let us say, gender inequality, but lower than in many other places. Now, you pointed to my work on MBAs and others as well. Note that the women are still doing extremely well, women who get MBAs, but the difference is that they're going into HR and marketing, and the men are going into investment banking and making a lot more. And so here we have the issue of, can we reduce the greediness of jobs? Can we increase the productivity of the flexible jobs? And I gave some ideas about that. It's not clear to me that there is a role for policy.
Mhm.
I'm open to anyone who has a brilliant policy. I don't.
Okay. Um,
Other than um, the changes in relative prices in caregiving.
mhm.
That's certainly a policy, and one that is would take resolve on the part of taxpayers.
Mhm. So, picking up on that idea of, I really love the ACDC and the BCE. The You've got a very pithy phrase that grabs the attention. So that idea, there's certainly a buyer's market in the UK at the moment in terms of people exiting high pressure jobs and having reflected on issues to do with their wider work-life balance. The possibilities around legacies of the pandemic to reduce the greediness of work, as you put it. I guess it's too early to tell, and economic historians never wish, in any case, to try to forecast the future. But of course, one of the most important things we can do is learn from previous patterns in terms of both history and economic history. What's your sense, or is it just simply we feel like we're in a very giant labour market experiment at the moment, with hybrid working, with certainly, as I say, some particular professions really struggling to appoint at appropriate levels, and partly as well working from home, meaning people in high demand jobs can work from anywhere at very high salaries. So there's a regional aspect to being able to supply the relevant skills for labour market shortages. Where do you see the greediness smashing into a kind of hybrid working, and who will win of that conundrum?
Yeah, let me just reflect a little bit as a historian, because you mentioned a very important point, which is it's rare that we see something that we would say, I've never seen anything like this before. And when you say that, it becomes very scary.
Mm-hmm.
So, where have we ever seen large changes in the labor market that reflect individuals, as you said, essentially going into work and saying, as in that famous movie, I can't take this anymore. I think that was Wall Street.
Yes.
Although nothing really changed. And where we can see it in all developed countries is in changes in the number of hours that people work. Even though we say that work is greedy and Americans really are wacko workaholics, And we can go back to Alexis de Tocqueville's writings, where he essentially said Americans are workaholics, and they still are. But we can look to our past, to the 20th century, and see that hours of work, hours of real work, hours of difficult, brawn, physical, manual labor, hot, dirty labor declined enormously.
Mm.
So there were changes in both where people worked, how people worked. That isn't to say that there aren't people who don't do difficult, strenuous labor today, but most people don't.
Mm-hmm.
In addition, practically no one works who is an hourly worker, works 6 days a week as they used to.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody works 72 hours a week as an hourly worker. Now, I'm sure if I clock the number of hours I put in, it's probably 72, but they're 72 easy, joyous, happy hours. They're not hours that someone's telling me to work. So the point is that we have seen changes, and you're absolutely right that when workers, and some of these came about because of the great labor movements of the past. And so we are seeing a new movement today of people saying, I want a different life.
Mm-hmm. So picking up on that, I want a different life. One of the trigger points that you pick up in a range of chapters is the massive reframing of women's opportunities through the introduction and the availability iteratively of the contraceptive pill. And there appears to be in a number of places around the world an attempt, at the very least, to look at eroding women's reproductive rights. And again, learning from history, there was a fantastic, I'm sure I'm going to get this not quite right, but one of your case study women that you quote, and one of the things I love about the book is it's a very different analysis of data combined with these real life women's voices through the 125 years of history that you chart. And one of the women describing that feminism had allowed her to want something, but effectively the pill had enabled her to have a career. So the kind of the distinction between wanting something and then having the technology and the pharmaceuticals to enable you to achieve something. How concerned should we be around the impacts of attempts to erode female reproductive rights, do you think?
I think we should always be concerned, but there are some things that you can't push the clock back on.
Mm-hmm.
So, or it's very difficult to push there are movements that take control, religious movements, and tyrannical dictators. But by and large, once then once the genie gets out of the bottle, it's really hard to stick the genie back into the bottle. And so what the pill did, and in some sense it went hand in hand with abortion rights. Mm-hmm. But what the pill really did for women who were in college, 19, 20, 21 years old, is it meant that you essentially didn't have to get engaged and take out essentially that insurance policy against being pregnant, and you were insured against that. Well, once you go that route, then you do get married earlier. Mm-hmm. And so what the pill did was it didn't necessarily change the number of children you were going to have, but it enabled you to delay marriage. Yeah. The marriage age in the US and elsewhere, where better forms of birth control and women controlled birth control came in, the marriage age, even for college graduates, went from a median age of about 22 and a half, 23, to about 27 in a very brief period of time is an enormously large change.
Mm. So I'm going to ask one last question and then turn to some questions from the audience. The hybrid working introductions and perhaps the flexibility of working for professional career women. On the one hand, as you were rightly saying, we need to avoid the idea of it becoming a female-only enclave. But there's also the relationship between presenteeism, long hours cultures in many sectors. And you specifically, I think, talked about law firms and banking firms are still on a, shall we say, a journey on that one. But the relativity of that presenteeism and long hours culture relative to productivity, and as someone who tracks data, do you think enough is being done to put in place the kind of data tracking to measure productivity in a more hybrid, flexible working environment across different sectors?
We don't do a very good job measuring productivity in the service sector. Okay. And productivity in the service sector is notoriously hard to measure. So the areas where we can measure productivity are not very high-end sectors, such as call centers.
Yeah.
And so there's an excellent piece by some recent graduates of my department of our PhD program that use data both before the pandemic and during the pandemic, as firms were switching to having not just those who opted to work at home, but sending everyone to work at home.
Mm.
And they could see that that individuals who had worked in the office and then worked at home were actually more productive. And you know, obviously not necessarily everyone, but there wasn't a decline in productivity. Now, that's call centers. I think it's pretty clear, and just about everyone who has tried to get something fixed in their home has discovered that there is a decline when someone says, well, you know, you want to get your chimney fixed. Well, the bricklayers, I never see them, but I'll contact them. You know, personal, and you use the word presentism in some sense, that you are with the person, you're face to face. There's empathy. You're human. They see you. They want to reach out. They want to help. And even more so, onboarding of new people. I feel sorry for individuals who are, many of my students began their first job remotely. And that's really very, very difficult. So I think that hybrid work, that we need smart people in HR to figure out how to do this right. And my guess is that we will be able to figure it out. And it's something that we will make mistakes with, and we will come back and do it better.
Yeah, as I said earlier, it is quite experimental. I mean, certainly from the teams that I run, I did not experience any levels of productivity. Actually, I was more worried about people being chained to their laptop and feeling there was no divide between their personal working environments, younger staff working in bedrooms and so forth, and trying to figure out a way to make them switch off actually during the kind of the most intense periods of
but I think that what this raises one last point, which is that we could always have done this.
Yeah.
You know, so I'll give you a small example. I run a seminar. We have a budget. We invite people in to so that we give them feedback and they educate us. And we would invite them, let's say, from California. Well, that's a big trip. We would invite them from Turkey. That's an even bigger trip. These were expensive. It meant it was also expensive for us in terms of I would have to take the person out to dinner several times. We could always have said to that person, do it remotely, but we needed a coordinating device. We needed that so that everybody knew how to use Zoom and would have done a better job sharing their screen than I did at the beginning. I'm
But
sorry,
the
it had
very
to do with the
fact,
fact that I had two screens up. Sorry.
no, the very fact that you are speaking to me from Harvard tonight, I mean, the logistical issues
Right.
we'd have both had to figure out trying to get you here for a period of time. And obviously we want you to come to York at some point, but this has been relatively straightforward to
Yeah,
organize.
it's been relatively painless had I not done something stupid. Sorry.
It was worth the
So,
wait.
but the point is that we could always have done this.
Yeah.
And why did we need a pandemic to lead to us to what I think is going to be a higher level of productivity?
I think that intersected with concerns about sustainability as well will reshape business travel. Let me turn to some questions.
Certainly.
There's a question here from Daniela. Would you agree that childcare and elder care should be considered infrastructure by the government? And I guess in your, well, let's say governments, and therefore requires government-led investment instead of leaving it to the private sector? Some childcare can cost more than a monthly wage, meaning it makes more sense for women to drop out of the workforce. And this was a theme I picked up in one of your chapters as well, Claudia.
Sure. Absolutely. They are infrastructure. I'll give you a very interesting case study. So they're infrastructure in the following way, that they produce capital, they produce human capital, and children, and they for people who are taking care of others, they allow them to be more productive. So I think, as I said before, it takes a certain amount of resolve because these are expensive. But I think that if we did the cost benefit analysis, it would work. But one small point, in the US in 1940, the Congress passed something called the Lanham Act. The Lanham Act was an infrastructure bill, and it provided funds for communities in the US because it was pretty clear that we were going to be producing for a war, maybe to aid allies, and later when we joined the war. And so this was an infrastructure bill because many communities were going to have tremendous demands on them in terms of water, housing, et cetera. When it was pretty clear that we also needed to increase the labor force, and this is equivalent to what we're talking about, this infrastructure bill was changed so that it wasn't changed. The funds were used for childcare.
Huh.
So in fact, we have a history in the US of using infrastructure, of calling childcare infrastructure.
Okay, so leading on then to, you are an economist. You've had an amazing track record of first female tenure track in all kinds of universities. But I guess one of my observations, having spent the early part of my own career working with some amazing economists, is frankly how male dominated the discipline is, even still. So some of those structural issues, some of those biases inherent in terms of economic policy making, are they affected by the makeup of the discipline itself? And we both work in universities. What else do you think we can do to create more gender parity in terms of the intakes and the shaping of the discipline to be more focused around these kinds of questions?
Sure. So there are two questions. How can we make certain that economics is more open, let's say, and that's with regard to not just women, but also first generation college students. And in each country, we may have a different definition of a minority. And the second one is, what difference does it make? Okay, those are related questions. Let me answer those. So I led a program called Undergraduate Women in Economics when I was president of the American Economic Association just after. And the issue that I faced was how to increase the number of women who major in economics. Essentially, why weren't they majoring in economics? And the answer was mainly that the notion of what economics is was different for men and women, and they were both wrong. So, or I should say, they both thought that economics, one thought that economics was a place that a subject that you learn and you go out and you make a lot of money and you become a financial economist, and that was good. And the other group thought that it was a subject in which only concerned things like the stock market and finance, and they didn't want it. Well, it turns out that both of them are wrong. Yes, it is the case that we know that people who major in economics actually do better in the labor market than majoring in a host of other fields, with the possible exception of computer science. So it's a very lucrative field, but it's also a field in which people become data scientists. They work on health issues, they work on labor issues, they work on inequality. They are just better able to analyze human behavior and markets. So it became, so then the issue that I had was, how do you get more women into the field, is simply getting better information to them. Now, the unfortunate thing is that this begins probably at the breakfast table when they're little and in high schools. And so by the time we see them in college, they already have ideas of what economics is, which are incorrect. Now, the second question that you ask is, does it make a difference? It makes a difference in the sense that we know from where our graduate students tend to go, and we know from looking at the field today that women and men have a bit of a divide in terms of the fields that they cover. That men tend to go more into the macro world of, and they tend to go into more in econometrics, and women tend to go more into some of the subjects that I mentioned before. So it certainly could make a difference. Yeah.
So I'm going to finish on this question because it really segues beautifully into that behavioral piece. And I love this question. You gave the example of that amazing congresswoman who brought her baby into Congress. And we've had a similar experience in the House of Commons here with a couple of serving MPs who've had babies. And the questioner says, obviously it gives women flexibility, but does it make them feel they have to do everything and that there's no boundaries at all?
Well, I mean, we're getting back to the issue of why is it just the woman, you know? So
I loved your phrase about men needing to lean out.
Yeah. So you know, so long ago, I used to get really annoyed when my mother would say of my sister's husband or my sister's or some of my uh my niece's husbands. We don't really have words for those, that they were babysitting. I would just go, right. So the point is that the only way we're going to have true gender equality is when men take more charge of their kids. And another part of this is that there are joys and wonders that they will miss and that they have missed. And I'm always listening to the older group, the 50 and 60-year-olds around me say, I'm so excited because we have a new grandchild and I'm going to give to that child what I didn't give to its father or mother. Well, you know, we should learn that you could have given the same thing. Now, this gets us full circle to what we were talking about at the beginning. The person would say, yeah, I could have, but we would have been poorer in terms of income. And that's where we have to strike at the incentives that the labor market is giving to greedy work.
So I will finish by saying, you may not have seen this because it was in the Times today, a fascinating pilot going on in the UK at the moment about concentrating work into 4 days. And one of the case studies was a man who reflected on his jaw-dropping moment of spending the first Friday morning dropping his daughter, his 8-year-old daughter, back to school and realizing what he'd been missing for the previous 4 years of her schooling so far. And it's very much a work in progress and very much a pilot. But I think this is an area of all of our lives and societal development that we will watch with interest. Hope that you can come to York at some point in person to explore these themes again, because I don't feel they're going away. But your book has given us such a fantastic grounding in such an important topic, just wonderfully communicated. Claudia, thank you so much for spending the time with us. I'm really, truly grateful. I'm going to hold up the book again and encourage everybody to read it, because it is full of incredible women's voices reflecting a diversity of experiences over such a period of history. I'm a huge fan of learning from history whenever we can. So thank you so much for spending the time with us at York Festival of Ideas. Thank you to our audience. It will be on Watch again as well. And please continue to share how amazing women's careers can be if we have the right structures around them to enable them to get to their best possible outcomes. Thank you, Claudia, for spending the time.
Thank you, Joan, and thank you, audience.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye, everybody.